The storm was falling heavily in Morocco when the elderly man walked across the square murmuring his supplications. He spoke softly, as he had learned since his youth. When the rain falls, Allah is listening. But a man scolded him loudly. "Speak properly, old man. No one here understands that whisper." The sentence cut through the air like a blade. Several people looked at the old man, embarrassed for him, unable to respond. And then it happened. The rain kept falling, but its sound vanished. The drops hit the ground without producing any noise. The nearest guard widened his eyes. A child tugged at her mother. Why did everything go silent? The entire square held its breath. The aggressor, still with his mouth open, stepped back, pale. It was as if the sky had decided to respond to the disrespect before anyone else could. What made the rain stop speaking at that exact moment? And why did everyone feel it was no coincidence? Stay with me, because the hidden meaning behind this moment reveals one of the most forgotten signs of divine mercy. Before continuing, make sure you are subscribed and tell in the comments which city you are watching from. Long before that strange day, the elderly man lived his quiet routine in an old neighborhood of Fez, where he worked selling dried herbs and rested in a simple home, illuminated only by the distant sound of the mosques. His prayers were punctual, always made on the same worn mat that had belonged to his father, the same man who, decades earlier, had taught him something he never forgot. "Son, when the rain falls, speak softly. It is when Allah opens doors for those who ask." That lesson marked his childhood. He remembered walking with his father through wet streets, watching the drops descend like small blessings. Since then, whenever the sky darkened, his voice softened, not out of shyness, but out of reverence. Rain, for him, was not just water, it was response, it was mercy. Fragility came with age. His knees ached, his breathing grew shallow on cold, windy days, and loneliness had followed him since his wife passed away. Even so, he carried dignity in every gesture. He never complained, never asked for anything beyond what was necessary. That morning, when the clouds began to form, he felt his heart tighten, not from fear of the storm, but from sensing that something unusual was about to happen. And he wasn't wrong. The morning advanced slowly as the elderly man left his small home and walked toward the central market of Fez. He stepped carefully, holding the bag of herbs he intended to sell. The city was alive, vendors calling customers, children running between stalls, tourists photographing everything. The noise of the bustle contrasted with the serenity he carried within him. As he walked, clouds began gathering behind the old rooftops. First, a soft grey, then heavier layers, as if the sky were assembling something important. Some people looked up, commenting on the possibility of a storm. Others kept talking loudly, indifferent to the warning above them. The elderly man had already recognized the sign. His hand rose instinctively to his chest, and his voice lowered without effort. Walking during rainfall had always been for him a moment of respect, a living memory of his father's words. Yet that morning, his reverence seemed out of place amid the noisy environment surrounding him. Upon reaching the marketplace square, the noise grew. Young men were speaking loudly about soccer. Two tourists shouted while recording videos. A seller gestured dramatically to announce his goods. All of it formed a mixture of sounds that weighed on the air. The elderly man joined the line at one of the stalls to deliver his bag of herbs to his usual buyer. The line grew quickly as people moved with impatience. He remained calm, holding the package firmly, even though his fingers trembled slightly. Suddenly, someone behind him shoved him hard. "Hurry up, old man, don't stand still," the man complained, irritated by the delay. The impact made the old man lose his balance for a moment. He stepped back, held his own arm, and took a deep breath to avoid falling. A young man 2 spots ahead turned around quickly. "Hey, don't do that. He was waiting like all of us." The aggressor smirked. "If he's that weak, he should come another day. No one here has time for slowness." The old man lifted his eyes without confrontation. He simply murmured, "May Allah grant you patience, son." His words were gentle, but the man curled his lips, bothered by the elder's calm. Ahead, the line moved forward and the moment passed, though it left a shadow in the atmosphere. The clouds above darkened faster, as if responding to that small act of disrespect. The wind carried the smell of wet earth even before the first drop fell. The old man felt the sudden coolness in the air and pressed the package against his chest. Meanwhile, laughter continued echoing across the square. Young people filmed the sky, joking about who would get wet first. Vendors gathered items, complaining about losing customers. No one seemed to understand that the approaching rain carried a different meaning for the quiet man standing among them. He took a slow breath, looked toward the dark horizon, and sensed the moment approaching, and with it, something that would change the atmosphere of the entire square. The first drops began falling as the elderly man stepped out of the line and moved toward a covered area of the square. He positioned himself beside a stone column, slightly bowed his head, and began reciting his soft supplications, almost like an intimate echo between him and the sky that was finally opening. The rain intensified gradually, creating a gentle sheen over the ground. That tranquility, however, did not last long. An employee from the neighboring stall, young, impatient, accustomed to the noise of the square, noticed him reciting quietly as the rain grew heavier. The sound of water hitting the awnings only irritated the young man further, who was already on edge because of the chaos caused by the incoming storm. He walked toward the elder and raised his voice in an unnecessarily harsh tone. "Sir, if you're going to ask for something, speak up. This isn't a place for whispers." Several people stopped immediately. The tone used against the old man sounded exaggerated, almost cruel compared to his steady calm. The elderly man raised his eyes slowly without confrontation, maintaining the same respect he had shown from the beginning. "I'm only giving thanks for the rain," he answered in a gentle voice. The worker scoffed. "Thanking? During business hours? That disrupts the flow. Either speak properly or go stand in the rain outside." His words echoed under the metal roof. Two nearby women exchanged looks of indignation. "He's not bothering anyone," the first woman whispered. "Exactly, he's only speaking to God," the second added, staring at the employee. The young man, already irritated by the argument, shook his head. "I need to work, not listen to some old man mumbling next to me." At the back of the square, two municipal guards observed the situation. One raised his chin, alert to the rising tension. The other furrowed his brow, still deciding whether he should intervene. The elderly man, noticing the discomfort, tried to step back to avoid causing trouble. "I don't want to disturb anyone. I'm only doing what I was taught." The employee cut him off with another shout. "Then learn something else. No one here has time for old habits." The rain, which had been falling heavily moments before, seemed to slow down in the area around the old man, a detail so subtle that only a few noticed. Among them, a young Moroccan man murmured, "This isn't normal. Look at how the drops are falling near him." The crowd's attention began shifting between the employee's behavior and that strange little phenomenon. The drops hit the rooftops with force, but near the elderly man they fell gently, as if hesitating before touching the ground. The guards took a few steps forward, watching both the disrespect and the curious behavior of the rain. An uncomfortable silence grew. The tension had taken root, and no one knew this was only the beginning. The employee was still adjusting the boxes at the stall when something unexpected began to transform the environment. The sky, already grey, darkened abruptly, as if an immense shadow had slipped behind the clouds. The sudden change made several people lift their faces, uneasy with the speed of the storm. The drops, which until then had fallen strongly across the entire square, began acting strangely. Their sound diminished as they approached the elderly man. They didn't stop falling, but hit the ground with almost no impact, nearly silent, while around him the noise remained loud, rhythmic, intense. The contrast was so clear that even the children noticed. "Mum, it's quieter over there," a boy said, pointing at the old man. The woman frowned. What her son said was true. Around the elderly man, the sound of the rain seemed muffled, as if someone had lowered the volume only in that spot. A group of young tourists sheltered under an awning decided to film the storm. One lifted his phone and zoomed in on the area where the old man stood. Suddenly, the screen captured something unusual, a small light moving with one of the falling drops, as if a tiny glow were trapped inside the water for a few seconds before disappearing. "I recorded that. Look," the Spanish youth said, showing the video to his friends. They watched it again. The glow was real. It wasn't a reflection from the stall or a lamp. The light came from above, traveled with the drop, and vanished upon hitting the ground. "This isn't normal," one of the girls whispered, now serious. Meanwhile, the wind began to change its behavior. First, a gentle breeze swept the square, moving only small bits of paper. Then it gained its own direction, drawing a subtle circular pattern. It didn't lift tents, didn't knock objects over. It only spun as if outlining an invisible ring around a specific area. A man who sold crafts noticed the phenomenon and called another vendor. "Look at the path of the wind. It's not pushing, it's circling." The observation was confirmed seconds later. The fabric hanging from the stalls trembled only at the edges, as if the wind were moving around each structure instead of passing through them. Near the elderly man, the silence grew even clearer. He continued reciting softly, his face lifted toward the dark sky. The drops touched the ground around him with remarkable gentleness, while just a few feet away, they splashed with force. 2 guards following the scene tried to communicate through their radios, but the devices crackled uselessly, as if interference had taken over the frequencies. "There's something wrong with the signal," one said, testing the button. "It's not just the radio. Look over there," the other replied. He pointed to the square's lighting. The street lamps began flickering, not chaotically, but at near regular intervals, like a heartbeat. Bright light, dim light, bright light, dim light. Each shift seemed to match the circular rhythm of the wind. The crowd started gathering around the spectacle. No one was calling it a miracle yet, but everyone sensed this wasn't mere coincidence. The man who had disrespected the elder earlier was now silent, watching everything with a pale face, as if realizing something far greater was unfolding around him. A woman observing closely murmured, "The sky responds when the heart is humiliated." The glow on the tourist's screen appeared again. A second drop fell with the same faint light, as though carrying a spark. The video clearly captured the phenomenon a second time. Little by little, the atmosphere shifted from simple astonishment to reverence. Something was happening, something none of them could explain, yet all felt deeply within their souls. And at the center of it all remained the old man, as if the sky itself were listening to every word he whispered. As the square struggled to understand the strange behavior of the rain, some people began comparing recordings, gathering in small groups beneath the awnings. The curiosity that had been scattered became sharply focused when the Spanish youth increased the audio of the video he had captured. He frowned and called his friends. "Listen, the sound disappears near that old man." They leaned closer to the phone. At the edges of the video, the rain fell heavily, producing the usual intense noise. But as the frame approached the elderly man, the sound simply vanished, as if someone had applied a silence filter exactly within that perimeter. "That's impossible," a French tourist said, covering her mouth. "How can the rain make noise everywhere and except there?" Another young man opened his own recording. The same phenomenon occurred. Loud noise around, silence the moment the old man appeared in the frame. He tested the microphone, tapping the phone. The tapping sound registered, but the raindrops disappeared every time the elder entered the shot. At the center of the square, a woman with a light-colored veil whispered to her daughter, "When I was little, my grandmother said rain is an hour of mercy. Maybe that's what this is." A man nearby heard her and added, "There's a hadith. The messenger said that during the rain supplications are accepted, and he also taught that one should not raise the voice at that moment." The information spread like sparks. Within seconds, several people repeated the same teaching, each in their own way but arriving at the same point. Rain is a moment of reverence. The square, once noisy, began falling into a respectful quiet, as if everyone were sensing the spiritual weight of what they were witnessing. One of the guards, noticing the growing commotion, approached the group watching the videos. "Let me see that," he said, keeping a professional posture, but clearly intrigued. The Spanish youth handed over the phone. The guard watched for a few seconds, then called his colleague. "Listen to the audio," he said. "The rain disappears. It's not a device malfunction. It happens in every video." His partner nodded, looking around. "We need to document this. It's happening near that man." They began collecting recordings from those who approached voluntarily. With each new video, more details emerged. The glow in the droplets, the localized silence, the circular wind keeping an exact distance from the elderly man. Some pilgrims compared timestamps, others measured the approximate radius of the quiet area. The more they observed, the harder it became to call it coincidence. Near a bread stall, 2 witnesses spoke in hushed voices. He was only giving thanks, and the employee yelled at him. And right after that, everything started, as if the sky had heard the injustice. The aggressor, now standing off to the side and visibly remorseful, avoided looking at the old man. He watched the growing commotion around him, too ashamed to intervene or explain anything. At the center of all that analysis, the elderly man remained leaning against the column, completely unaware of the technical comparisons and theories forming around him. His lips moved in a steady rhythm, repeating the same dhikr he had been reciting since the rain began. "Ya Latif," he murmured, calling upon the one who is gentle with his servants. With each repetition, the silence around him seemed to deepen, There was no fear, no strangeness, only reverence, as if the entire square were being guided to see not the phenomenon itself, but the meaning behind it. A few believers approached slowly, keeping a respectful distance. "He is at peace," said a Syrian man, moved. "More than we are," another replied. "Maybe that's why the rain protects him." The guards, now convinced this was not simple natural interference, decided to continue gathering reports. One of them looked up at the darkened sky and murmured, barely realizing it, "If this is a warning, it's not over." And the entire square, sensitive to the atmosphere forming around them, felt the same, that something greater was about to be revealed. While the guards collected more recordings, the murmuring in the square began to take on another form. It was no longer just surprise, it was the sense that there was a pattern behind the sequence of events. Something connected the young man's disrespect to the unusual behavior of the rain, and that connection would soon become clear. A Moroccan youth approached with his phone in hand, breathless. "I have something you need to see. It didn't just happen today." He opened a video recorded the day before. The footage showed the same stall employee arguing with an elderly man, trying to shield himself from a light drizzle. The older man, bent over, murmured something as he adjusted his coat. The employee appeared in the frame, irritated. "Speak properly, man. What's with this whispering?" At the exact moment the employee raised his voice, the droplets around them decreased in intensity. They didn't stop. They simply softened, as if someone had turned the faucet halfway. The effect lasted only a few seconds, but it was noticeable. A group watching the video held their breath. "The rain changed when he yelled," murmured a Tunisian woman. Another video followed immediately. An Algerian woman showed her recording from the previous week, when the employee had argued with another elderly man in the same square. He complained that the man was blocking the entrance simply for walking slowly. At the very moment his tone rose, a gentle gust pushed the droplets aside, making the area around them momentarily clearer. "It happened twice," the woman said. "3 times, corrected the Moroccan youth. "Again today." The employee, hearing the conversation drawing closer, tried to justify himself. "You're exaggerating. This is coincidence." An Egyptian tourist reviewing the videos with the guard shook his head. "Coincidence doesn't repeat a rhythm. The rain reacts the very second you shout." The employee went pale. I was just trying to organize the line. You don't understand." But before he could finish, another group approached with more evidence. A young girl, a film student, had recorded everything with her professional camera. "Look at this," she said, enlarging the footage in high definition. "Watch this pattern." The recording showed the exact moment the employee told the old man to speak up or leave. The zoom revealed something no phone had captured so clearly. The droplets shifted direction for a split second, as if a gentle field redirected them away from the elderly man. It wasn't wind. It was something more subtle, more coordinated, more impossible to ignore. The guards exchanged tense looks. "Bring all these videos," one said, trying to maintain professional posture despite the clear shock. The square no longer carried the same noise as before. People spoke softly, as if afraid to break an invisible link between heaven and earth. 2 men watching the recordings commented quietly, "He always yells at the elderly. I've seen it 3 times. "So have I," the other replied, "but I never imagined that." The rain reacted. The employee tried to step away, but the crowd itself formed a space around him, keeping him at the center, not out of anger but out of gravity. He touched his face, anxious, while the footage continued passing from hand to hand. "This can't be. It can't be because of me." But the recordings made it unmistakably clear. Every time he spoke with disrespect, an unusual phenomenon occurred with the rain. It was as if nature had chosen to record the moment of irreverence, preserving every insult, every raised voice, every rude gesture. The elderly man, a few steps away, continued his calm dhikr, untouched by anything happening around him. His lips moved gently, "Ya Rahman, Ya Rahim," calling upon the most merciful, entirely unaware that a collective revelation was forming behind him. The employee, feeling everyone's eyes on him, finally stepped back. I didn't know, I swear I didn't know." But in that moment no one replied. The entire square understood that it was no longer about knowing, but about acknowledging, and the weight of truth had finally fallen on the one who needed to hear it. The recordings continued circulating among those present as the tension reached a critical point. The employee remained frozen, unable to face the people around him. The entire square, consumed by a mix of disbelief and indignation, watched in growing silence. Some could no longer hold back their outrage. "He needs to be removed from here," a Syrian man said, tightening his fists. He's always treated the elderly like that. Now everyone saw it, added a Moroccan woman. Call his supervisor, this can't go unaddressed, another murmured, his gaze severe. 2 municipal guards finally approached the employee. The radio still had interference, but their posture made it clear they had decided to act. Sir, we need you to come with us, the older one said, placing himself between the aggressor and the crowd. The employee opened his mouth to respond, but no sound came out. His hands trembled and the sweat on his forehead revealed the panic taking hold of him. He looked around quickly, as if searching for support, but no one stepped forward. The entire square had seen enough. The guards moved in a bit more, but before they could touch the man, something shifted the direction of the moment. The crowd's gaze turned away from the aggressor and toward the elderly man. The wind that had been swirling since the beginning of the phenomenon now concentrated around him, gently lifting the hem of his halabia. The old man remained with his eyes half closed, completely unaware of the turmoil, reciting quietly. And then someone nearby heard him clearly. Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakil. Allah is sufficient for us and He is the best protector. The phrase echoed unexpectedly, as if the silence itself had amplified the whisper. Those closest to him froze immediately, touched by the serenity flowing from him. The woman who heard him first brought her hand to her chest and began to cry. The guards hesitated. The employee held his breath. The entire crowd waited. The elderly man slowly lifted his face toward the clouds. There was no accusation in his expression, no bitterness, no anger, only complete surrender, so profound it made the onlookers rethink their own impulses. What did he say? An Egyptian tourist asked, voice trembling. That Allah is enough, a Sudanese man answered. When someone says that, they hand the matter to the heavens. The guards looked at each other. The decision that had seemed obvious no longer felt so simple. Removing the aggressor meant following human protocol. Staying and waiting meant honoring something higher, a judgment that didn't belong to them. The square, filled with witnesses, awaited the outcome, as if the conflict had shifted from a dispute between 2 people to a spiritual matter. The aggressor, realizing the attention had turned to the elder, took a hesitant step back. He tried to say, but his voice remained locked. The silence deepened. The rain, which had shifted in intensity before, settled into a soft, steady rhythm, as if the sky itself were listening to the dhikr. The old man finished his recitation and inhaled deeply. His expression showed no desire for punishment. On the contrary, it radiated a calm so intense it disarmed every aggressive impulse around him. The crowd understood without a word. The answer would not come through human force, but divine wisdom. The guards, now more focused on the elder's demeanor than the crowd's outrage, stepped back slightly, waiting. It was as if the scene had moved beyond human control and into a realm ruled only by humility, patience, and reverence. The employee, tense and wide-eyed, waited for a verdict, human or celestial. And in that suspended moment, caught between expectation and faith, everyone realized the outcome would not be ordinary. Something greater was about to happen. The moment felt suspended in the air, as if no one wanted to breathe before understanding what was about to unfold. The employee, frozen, watched everyone's reaction without knowing whether he should run, apologize, or simply disappear. The elderly man kept his head slightly bowed, as if he had already surrendered everything he needed to the heavens. Then the wind changed. A gentle breeze began moving across the square, weaving around people as if searching for a specific path. It first touched the edges of the market, slowly circling between the stalls. Then it formed a clear circular pattern, drawing a perfect ring around the spot where the elderly man stood. The fabrics hanging from the stalls swayed inward and outward along the boundary, following a rhythm that felt impossible to be natural. The crowd stepped back, not out of fear, but out of respect. No one wanted to enter that movement that seemed to have its own awareness. A child grabbed her mother's hand and whispered, "Mum, he's inside a circle of wind." She didn't answer. She only squeezed the child's hand, her eyes filling with tears. The rain, which had been falling uniformly, changed its behavior as if responding to a second impulse of nature. Inside the circle around the elder, the drops slowed until they almost vanished. The ground beneath him dried rapidly, as if the wind lifted every drop before it could touch the surface. But outside the circle, especially above the aggressor, the sky seemed to have a different plan. The clouds opened in a single spot and released a heavy downpour directly onto him. It didn't touch anyone nearby, nor splash onto the people around him. It was a narrow column of water, direct, constant, abrupt. "Alas, are you seeing this?" an elderly woman whispered, covering her face. The employee looked up, terrified. Water crashed onto his head, pushing him backward. He tried to keep his balance, but his feet slipped on the soaked ground, which grew slicker by the second, precisely in the area only he occupied. "I didn't mean any harm. He stammered, but his voice dissolved in the sound of the water. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Everyone else remained dry, with only scattered droplets at the edge of the circle. He, however, received the entire downpour, as if he alone bore the weight of an entire sky. People began crying, overwhelmed by the sight. It wasn't punishment, but it was a sign, a warning, mercy taking the shape of an alert. The guards, who moments earlier considered removing him, now stood frozen, unsure whether they should interfere. They were witnessing something that surpassed any human authority. The employee slipped again, falling to his knees. The water continued pouring over him in an unbroken stream, while the circle around the elder remained untouched, protected by that gentle wind that seemed to possess intent. A collective silence took over the square. It wasn't the absence of sound. It was pure reverence, as if every heart recognized it was witnessing something explainable only by faith. Tears streamed down the faces of strangers. People of different languages and cultures held onto each other for support. No one dared speak loudly. The rain had responded, and now everyone understood what it meant. The column of water finally weakened, as if the sky had decided to lessen the burden falling upon the employee. The rain still covered him, but with less force, while the circle around the elder remained untouched, guarded by that gentle wind with a will of its own. The square, once noisy, was now consumed by an almost sacred stillness. The aggressor tried to stand, but his legs trembled so badly they could hardly support him. When he finally managed to rise, he staggered a few steps forward and looked directly at the elderly man. The eyes that once held arrogance now overflowed with fear and remorse. He opened his mouth, swallowed hard, and finally managed to say in a broken voice, "Forgive me, please. I didn't know." The elderly man lifted his face slowly, as if awakening from a deep state of spiritual surrender. He did not seem surprised nor vengeful. He simply looked at the man with such quiet compassion that the crowd felt their chests tighten. The guards, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere, stepped back and left open space between the two of them. They understood that the situation was no longer administrative or disciplinary. It was human and spiritual. One of them moved, ran a hand over his face discreetly to hide his tears. The Tunisian woman holding her child's hand whispered, "When Allah shows, there is no pride left." The aggressor, still drenched, moved a little closer, but on his third step, he collapsed to his knees again, exhausted. He placed his hands on the wet ground and lowered his head, unable to bear the weight of his own remorse. "I treated you with disrespect. I humiliated others too. May Allah forgive me," he whispered, his voice breaking. The crowd watched in absolute silence. Some cried openly. Others simply held their breath, afraid to disturb the atmosphere suspended between heaven and earth. The elderly man finally stepped forward. His sandals made no sound, for the ground around him remained dry, protected by the strange circular breeze. He approached the employee gently, as someone approaches a wounded soul, and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Son, sincere repentance is an open door," he said, in a soft voice that everyone could hear without him raising it. At that very moment, the rain changed again. The drops became thin, bright, almost translucent. Some witnesses swore they saw a whitish glow reflecting inside them, as if there were light within the water. The entire square seemed illuminated by a gentle brightness, even though the sky remained closed. The aggressor lifted his face slowly. His expression was that of someone broken on the inside, and yet rebuilt. The wind that had circled the elderly man began to dissipate gradually, as if it had completed its mission. The French woman who had recorded part of the scene murmured, her voice trembling, "This is mercy, not punishment," and many silently agreed. The guard stepped back further, creating even more space for the elderly man, as if acknowledging that something was manifesting there that no authority could control or interfere with. The rain continued falling so lightly that it felt like a blessing touching each person, and in that moment it became clear to everyone that the transformation of the aggressor was not merely the result of fear, but of an inner awakening, sparked by something none of them would ever forget. The entire square witnessed the moment when pride yielded to repentance, and repentance found mercy. When the aggressor's transformation settled before everyone's eyes, the square seemed to breathe differently. The tension that had dominated the space dissolved, giving way to a quiet reverence no one had to impose. The rain, now fine and luminous, slid over the old stones with softness, as if returning to its original purpose, to remind hearts of divine mercy. People began to disperse, but without raising their voices. It was remarkable. Even the most excited tourists spoke only in whispers, looking toward the sky with a mix of shyness and awe. The rule had not been written on a sign, nor enforced by human authority. It had simply taken root in the spirits of those who witnessed the event. The rain was no longer just a natural occurrence. It was an invitation to reverence. The elderly man adjusted his damp clothing and took a few slow steps out of the square. Before, he would have made the walk alone, ignored or even hurried by others. But this time, young people from different backgrounds approached to accompany him. A Sudanese youth offered his arm for support. A Spanish student carried the herbs he had brought to the market. Two Moroccan girls cleared the path ahead, making sure the slippery ground posed no danger. "Allow us to accompany you to the mosque, uncle," the Sudanese youth said with genuine respect. The elderly man smiled, a serene smile carrying decades of quiet faith. "May Allah illuminate you, my children." The group walked beside him through the narrow alleys, where the sound of the rain remained soft, almost musical. Everyone who crossed their path lowered their voice instinctively upon seeing him pass. Some nodded, others touched their chest with their right hand as a sign of reverence. There was gratitude in their eyes, the kind that needed no explanation. The news of what had happened spread quickly through the market. Shopkeepers spoke softly as they closed their stalls, and even the animals seemed eerily calm. A bread seller commented to a customer, "Today we learned that even the rain can teach." At the mosque entrance, the young people bid farewell to the elderly man with respect. He walked in slowly, leaning on his cane, while the faint light reflecting from the drops created a soft glow in the courtyard. Inside, some worshippers greeted him as if he were someone who had just passed through an invisible test. The new behavior spread through the city that afternoon. Whenever the sky threatened rain, conversations naturally quieted. People remembered what they had witnessed and understood, almost intuitively, that moments of mercy were moments of humility. And so in silence and with slow steps, that simple day transformed how an entire community treated the rain, not as weather, but as a tender reminder of the divine grace that descends upon those who know how to listen. When the elderly man finished his prayer inside the mosque, the rain continued falling outside with an almost sacred softness. The courtyard stones reflected thin lines of light, as if each droplet left a glowing trail before disappearing. There was something different about that late afternoon, not only in the atmosphere, but in the way everyone walked, spoke, and looked at the sky. The square, which hours earlier had witnessed tension and disrespect, now carried a silence of reverence. Those walking under the drizzle kept their voices low, not out of fear, but gratitude. The memory of what they had seen, the wind, the changing rain, the transformation of the human heart, remained too vivid to be ignored. The episode left no mark of fear, but rather a gentle reminder. Mercy descends like rain, but not everyone knows how to receive it with respect. The small droplets kept falling, each one like a silent invitation. The sky does not always speak with thunder. Sometimes it speaks with silence, and those present that day understood that humility is not weakness. It is a key that opens invisible doors. The elderly man left the mosque with slow steps, feeling the water touch his skin softly. He smiled as he realized that even amid all the signs, the greatest lesson remained simple. Where there is respect, there is blessing. If this story touched your heart, make sure you are subscribed to the channel and watch the next video, where we continue sharing reflections that strengthen faith and illuminate the spiritual journey.